The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is charged with the idea of taking the lessons from the past and transferring them to our future.
As stewards of history in the Birmingham movement, the BCRI houses incredible collections that show and document where the community has come from and how the Birmingham movement both came to be and was so successful.
For more than 25 years, the Institute has educated people about what happened here in the 60s, not just in Birmingham, but across our country. Civil rights and equality challenged today just as they were many decades ago. We are here to enlighten each generation about civil and human rights by exploring our common past and working together in the present to build a better future.
Through many educational offerings, we teach the idea that the changes in Birmingham, Alabama were not just because of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and Reverend Ralph Abernathy. A lot of these changes took place because of the youth in this city. And due to that, we have a mission to share with the youth of today what youth in their generations in the past have done. Through our Legacy Youth Leadership Program, we bring high school students from all over the Jefferson County area here to study this narrative and to serve as docents and ambassadors to the Civil Rights Institute. We have BCAP, which is the Birmingham Cultural Alliance Project, where we visit middle school students and we take them through this history and through this narrative so that they can prepare to understand their role in society. We have outreach programs that visit many schools and institutions to highlight the story of accomplishment, the story of overcoming, the story of a power and the movement that people in Birmingham were able to bring to bear to change not only the city, but the state, the nation, and the world.
By making it accessible to researchers and local students from middle, high, and university students, they're able to come in and see where we've been so that they can go and be better stewards of Birmingham and our present and then our future.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging virtual conversation series. We invite you to help us continue the work for civil rights through racial justice by becoming a member or donating to our work. You can find us on our social media platforms to stay connected with us. Thanks again for your support.
Welcome and greetings. My name is Charles Woods. I'm the Education and Programs Manager at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and we have a very special author interview that we're doing today. And so let me go ahead and get started and introduce our moderator today, our host. Her name is Miss Diane Mcwhorter. Diane Mcwhorter grew up in Birmingham and is a longtime contributor to the New York Times and also has written op-ed pages for the U.S. Today. Her articles about race, politics, and culture have appeared in many national publications, including the Washington Post. And her first book is Carry Me Home, and she also lives in New York City. Thank you, Diane, for doing this for us today.
My pleasure.
All right, I'm also going to go ahead and introduce our original foot soldier, Mr. Charles Person. Charles Person is one of two living original freedom riders who remained with the original ride from its start in Washington, D.C. to New Orleans. The historic event helped defeat Jim Crow laws in the United States, and he is also a sought-after public speaker. And Mr. Person maintains an active contact with schools, museums, and the activist community, and he currently lives in Atlanta. So I just want to say thank you for both of you all being here. Really quick, I just wanted to mention that I had an opportunity to meet Mr. Hank Thomas, who's also the other original foot soldier. It was the first program I did when I started working here at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. And so I'll never forget that. It's a powerful information and a very powerful story. So you all are in for a treat today. So thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to you, Miss Diane, and go ahead and let you all get started. So thank you all once again. Y'all enjoy.
For having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Person, I can't see you right now, but maybe you'll come back. There you are. Thank you. I am the author of Carry Me Home, which I spent 18 years writing. It's a civil rights history of Birmingham. And the Freedom Ride is one of the major chapter or twos. I wrote one thing that narrative historians have to do is try to come up with the sort of a quote that captures an entire scene or entire epic. And one of the great things about your book, which we're talking about today, The Buses Are Coming, is your story of your slice of this Freedom Ride story. And I just want to say, first of all, it's just a wonderful book. It's so juicy. It's so good. And no matter how much historians know about something, it's often hard for us to imagine what it was like to be there. So thank you for providing that for us. And for all of you people who may be listening, if you're not really that interested in civil rights, this is also a food odyssey. Your discussion of red-eye gravy, of your mother's red-eye gravy, is worth the cost of admission. It's just so good. Anyway, I found myself being so hungry while I was reading it. But we'll get, and then that, which leads me to the great mystery of the book that we'll get to. But so one of the things that you were one of the quotes that I kept coming, that whenever I would read your quote that's in my book, it would almost bring tears to my eyes. And so what it is was when do we have the scene of the, did you find the scene of the beating inside the Birmingham Trailways bus? Mr. Person, maybe you can hold it up. So, no, that's not it. Yeah. So this is, we're gonna give a little background. Okay, so this photograph is what was about to happen when Mr. Person debarks from the Trailways bus in Birmingham on Mother's Day of 1961, and his white comrade gives him a look that says, we don't have to do this if you don't want to. And Mr. Person said, let's go. And so that to me was, that's your line in my book. And that to me just sort of said it all, just that what passed between you two because of what had been leading up to it. And we're going to get to that today. So we're leading up to that photograph. But first, let's just sort of give a little background about what the Freedom Rides were. They were, if you think of the civil rights movement in terms of the greatest hits, I would say that the Freedom Rides were probably number 4 on the hit parade after the bus boycott, Little Rock, the sit-ins, which was your baptism into this, and then the Freedom Rides was number 4. So you want to just sort of just talk a little bit about what they were and who was the leader and what they were hoping to accomplish, and then we'll get into how you intersected with it.
Okay, good. James Farmer was basically the CEO of the Congress of Racial Equality, and he and his group knew that in the Jim Crow South, many times laws were ignored, and in those instances where the signs were taken down because people were so used to segregating themselves, they continued to segregate themselves. So the idea was to demonstrate not only to the country but to the world how bad Jim Crow or how segregation was in interstate transportation. So there were 2 Supreme Court decisions, Morgan versus Virginia and Boynton versus Virginia, and they laid the groundwork for our trip. And we prepared for it by extensive training in nonviolence so that we would be able to confront whatever presented itself on the ride south. And we knew the further south we got, the more difficult it would become.
Right. So what the Supreme Court decisions had desegregated in the first case, interstate buses going from state to state. And then in the second one, which was in 1960, which was Boynton, which was based on a man from Selma, It was the actual terminals, the waiting rooms and restaurants and bathrooms in the stations. So even though it was legal, as you said, for African Americans to use those, they were abiding by custom, and many southern states still had the colored and white only and colored signs up. So you guys were going through there testing that, and I know that James Farmer in his memoir said that he was a little bit jealous of Martin Luther King, and he wanted to make a splash, right? So he decided that he was going to do this freedom ride. Now, you were a student at I think we've said, or the intro said that you were the very youngest one of this group of, well, the original was what, maybe 15 people?
13 people.
13 people, yeah. And you had just started your freshman year at Morehouse College in Atlanta. You'd grown up in Atlanta. So you had been sort of initiated into the movement during the sit-ins and had gone to jail. And you want to talk a little bit about that? And then if you would, I would love for you to read one of my favorite passages from the book. Do you have a copy handy on page 100?
Oh, yes, sure, I have one.
Okay.
At first, they would not allow freshmen to participate in the sit-ins, but as time went on and we became acclimated to life on campus, then they allowed the freshmen to participate, and it became infectious. I mean, I was there every day, sit-in. I would make my first hour class, and then I would be in the streets. But what worked out is that our fellow students got our assignments and kept us up to date. And at the sit-ins, you knew they weren't going to serve you. So we sat at the lunch counters and we did our homework. And we make sure we got them back to our classmates so they would get them back to the professors. But after the city refused to negotiate with the Black students, we decided a Nobel status. In other words, we're going to go to jail and we're not going to post bail. And I was arrested on February the 7th, along with a bunch of other students. And we were determined to fill the jails. We averaged about 20 to 70 students a day going to jail. And each day we would communicate to each other by singing songs to let others know how many people were arrested that day. But one day we were singing, and I guess I was a little too aggressive, and I was singing too loudly. And they put me in solitary confinement. So
can you read that passage? I just love it. I would like to. It starts on page 100, and okay. It's well, let's see. I think it's 100 of the galleys, and it's at the bottom, and it begins in any emotive situation.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just read to the end of that paragraph.
Yeah. In any emotive situation.
Jail singing.
In any emotive situation, there's always someone a bit more engaged, a bit more enraptured, a bit more caught up in that particular moment, and a bit more oblivious. That person stands out in the crowd. 6 days into the jail sentence, that person was me. Everyone was singing, but one of us was singing too exuberantly. Somehow they singled me out and decided, I'm going to show you. I would make an example. It would be solitary for me. So I spent 10 days in solitary confinement, which was very difficult at first, because there you had no exterior lighting. They took all my reading material. I had no communication with anyone. And like I said, the first couple of days were rough. But when I learned to deal with that, I acquired a certain quietness, a certain patience, and I think it really helped me not only as we continued to move in Atlanta, but the Freedom Rise. It gave me comfort, and also when I was in Vietnam, the same all that was a preparation for what was to lie ahead for me.
And it didn't seem from the book that religion played that much of a role in your kind of stamina there. Were you because that wasn't really your focus that much, right?
Well, I was not. I was an engineering student, a math student. I was not a religious, applying for religious orders or anything, but we prayed a lot. I mean, our prayers were very simple. I had a teenage prayer: "Dear Lord, thank you. Protect me." I didn't get elaborate like how Baptist preachers can get. No, that was not me. We were just a direct communication with God, and just said, "Hey, protect me." And those are the kind of things that helped us. And that, along with songs, really got us through. Now, I had gone to church a lot, but like I say, we had some kids that they could really pray, they really, but that was not me. My prayers were very simplistic, but I think my prayers were heard just like everyone else.
Right, right. Well, I know that Birmingham is kind of hung up on Morehouse. A lot of people are hung up on Morehouse. It's the Harvard of the HBCUs, right? And so and your path there was rather interesting and unexpected. So talk a little bit about growing up in Atlanta, big loving family, not a lot of money, not as you said that you were in the bottom, and in contrast to Lonnie King, who was the student leader at Morehouse, was looking up at the bottom. So you had some advantages. Talk about how you landed at Morehouse.
Well, Morehouse was not my first choice. As being a good student, I had offers from all over the country. I had a 4-year offer from Tuskegee, but there was no way I was going to go to school in Alabama at that particular time. And the program I was interested in was nuclear physics or nuclear engineering, and it was a 5-year program, and there were very few universities that offered a degree, but one of the best was MIT. So in my junior year, I applied and I was accepted. MIT had a 2-tier acceptance. You supplied your application as a junior, and your PSAT scores, and they would preliminary accept you. And then as a senior, after you taken the SAT and your finals, they would give you acceptance. Well, it cost $2,000 a year for MIT in 1960. Georgia Tech had just gotten this reactor, and the tuition there was $375 a semester, which my family could handle that. So I applied to Georgia Tech, and they denied me admissions. So I decided to go to Morehouse. Georgia Tech had a program where they really didn't discriminate on you directly. What they did is that they didn't deny you because of academics, but what they required you to have is 3 blue sheets were in the application package, and 2 of the sheets required recommendations for former members of the alumni, and the third one was to be certified by the county that you were a resident. And getting certified by the county was no problem, but getting 2 members of the alumni to recommend me was not going to happen, not in 1960. So that's how I ended up at Morehouse.
So that's interesting, because that's how doctors were not, and Black doctors were not able to get into the AMA, because they had to first be a member of the County Medical Association, and they had to get local members to recommend them, and they were all white, of course. And so, for example, Dr. James Montgomery in Birmingham said that he had there were a number of white doctors who said that they would recommend him for the national boards, but they wouldn't recommend him for the local society, because I always say to people, white people are afraid of each other, and so they were fine as long as it wasn't taboo, to recommend him. So that's one of the reasons that you would not have been able to get an alum to recommend you. So did you, it's interesting that you go from that to being a student activist within a year, and did it occur to you to fight that, to take Georgia Tech to court or anything? Or was it such a technicality that it would have been difficult?
The University of Georgia had just recently integrated its campus, and it was terrible because there were riots and there was all kinds of things. And I knew Hamilton Holmes because he was at Morehouse prior to going to the University of Georgia. I just wanted to get acclimated to school and back to studies. Um, and I was not what you'd call an activist. I just wanted justice. And I guess basically, it's like my grandfather said, you can sit around and you can complain about things, so you can do something about it. And I guess I learned how to do something. Maybe I did more than was anticipated or expected. But the idea was, don't sit around and just mope and groan when there are solutions to problems out there.
Yeah, and there's a great scene in the book about when you're a pin boy at the bowling alley, and talk about going into the diner, the fabulous diner, and seeing the Georgia Tech guys there. And
the Majestic is still there, believe it or not. All the things that happened in the Briarcliff area, it's still there. And the food was always great. And but I was not aware at the time about blacks not being able to sit and eat in restaurants, because in our neighborhoods we had restaurants too, and well, of course we could eat and they do. So when I went there with some of the other pin boys, and I'm ready to take a seat, and they says, no, we can't do this. And it was puzzling to me why I couldn't eat in this diner. And Georgia Tech had a lot of foreign students, Iranians, and many of them were as dark as I was. And I'm saying, they were telling me, you because of your color. I'm saying, well, they're dark as I am. Why are they allowed to eat and I can't? And even to this day, it bothers me for a different reason, because many of those young men were in the nuclear program at Georgia Tech, is what I wanted to be in.
mm-hmm.
And they, and now, we have this problem with Iran and their nuclear program. And I bet you most of their senior scientists were educated right there in Georgia.
At Georgia Tech, right?
At
Exactly.
Georgia Tech, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Angela Davis, who is from Birmingham, of course, and her sister, they could speak French, and she writes in her autobiography of going into shoe stores in Birmingham and speaking French, and if the white clerks thought that they were foreign, they treated them okay, So it's just had something to do with African American, So then you see an ad for the Freedom Rides. You don't know what they are, but you apply, right? So let's talk us through that.
Well, after we were successful in desegregating the lunch counters and improving hiring conditions in Atlanta, the Congress for Racial Equality sent out this a summons, basically, and they requested people to participate in a Freedom Ride. Well, no one knew what a Freedom Ride was, but it gave us an opportunity to fight Jim Crow on a larger scale, and I guess that's what enticed me to apply. I didn't think I would be accepted because there are other members in Atlanta who are much more experienced than I, and but somehow they chose me. And I used to think that it was because I was so young, I had no negatives in my background. In other words, I was squeaky clean. But I don't know. The only negative I guess I had was being a jailbird at 18. But other than that, I hadn't done anything wrong.
So you show up your first time that was your first time out of Georgia, right?
Well, first time leaving the state, yes.
Yeah, and you show up at you pull into the Greyhound bus station, and Julian Bond, who was a student activist at the time, a leader of the sit-ins, said to you when you were leaving, "This is the last time you'll ride on the back of the bus," right? And there's a wonderful passage in the book where you talk about, well, actually it wasn't, because I had to get on all these other buses on the way up there and be, called the N-word and told to get to the back of the bus too. And I guess, his point was both a reassurance and a challenge, right? That's what this was it. So you go through, so you meet. I loved so this was the first time you had significant exposure to white people, right? Because the Freedom Rides, the original Freedom Rides, were some old line lefties, white lefties, including James Peck, who was a trust fund baby. Well, two of them were, Bigelow and Peck were trust fund babies. What was it like I mean, they were pretty unusual anyway. But I want you to talk about what Peck said to you as well. But yeah, so talk about him a little bit. Some old people may remember there was I think it was a furniture store, may have just been a department store called Peck and Peck, and that was his family. Yeah.
Well, when we got to the Freedom House in Washington, D.C., and everyone started to arrive, and I saw all these white people, and I'm saying, why are they here? Because in Atlanta, we had almost no white participation. And I was curious as to why they were there. And in a roundabout way, I would inquire as to why they were participating. And I later found out that they had extensive backgrounds in social justice issues, and they were very passionate about it. And also, I realized that, a couple of them were millionaires, and they didn't have to be there. And but it challenged me. I'm saying, if these people who are willing to risk it all, including their lives, for the emancipation of Black people, then surely I, as a Black man or Black kid, should be able to fight, or willing to fight for freedom. So it motivated me more and more, because they didn't have to be there, and they chose to. But also, the Bergmans said, hey, they were like my mother and father. They said, we're going to take care of you. And he really did. Dr. Bergman really tried to protect us on 2 occasions, and it nearly cost him his life on both occasions. And I can never forget that.
Yeah, we'll get to that, because that's sort of that's one of the high points of the book, or low points. So you had the Bergmans. So you had the Pecks. You had Albert Bigelow, who had been a Navy hero, and he had become an anti-nuclear pacifist after we dropped the bomb on Japan.
Yeah.
And then the Bergmans were a couple educators from Detroit,
Right.
and they were all on the older side. Peck certainly had been on the original Freedom Ride in 1947, which attested the first Supreme Court case we talked about. So so I'll tell you now, the most shocking thing in the book to me was when you didn't go to the Chinese restaurant, which was because all historians pick on that detail, because right before the Freedom Riders were about to depart, they had what was jokingly called the Last Supper.
Yeah.
And when I read it, you didn't go because Chinese food was too weird. I went, what? A foodie like you?
Well, it was 2 things. And one that didn't appear in the book is that the cook there, she was a wonderful cook, and she made the best Black bread that you could ever. And I was, I love coffee and butter and bread, and I spent the evening with her. And I think also the Last Supper, I think some of them may have had adult beverages, and that was not my, forte in those particular days. So that was one of the reasons, but I don't have no regrets, because the relationships that we built there. But the thing is, I had hoped that afterwards I had kept copious notes about people I'd met and things like that. And I was going to hope to renew a lot of those relationships after the ride was over. And however, Birmingham decided otherwise.
Right. We'll get to that as well. But one of my favorite lines in the book is when you're talking to Peck about why he does this, why he puts himself on the line for African Americans who don't know him and don't know who he is, and talk about that conversation.
Well, James was a mild-mannered man, and his response to me was, basically, just like I breathe, or it's as normal as taking a breath.
Yeah.
It's as normal. And I'm saying that to you, it seems that way, but like it's coming from where I had come from, that was just, but it was an eye opener. And I just, I'm hoping, and one thing I hope in the book will do is those people whose name they may have heard and don't know very much about, that they will get a sense of their character, their desires, and just just a little bit more about them. And it's, you know, it's not about me. It's just about the people that supported me, encouraged me, and they just make me who I am.
Yeah, and it's sort of like you were the passerby in a certain way that it affected your life, but you weren't. These were kind of professional activists, and Peck is. But in the line in the book is he says, "Why?" When you ask him, and he says, "Why do you breathe, Charles?"
Yeah.
You know, it's just like what I just do. And I know one of my favorite lines from Shuttlesworth, Fred Shuttlesworth, was, you know, people were always asking him how he could be so courageous because, I mean, he just put his life on the line so many times. And he said, I don't think of it as courage. I think of it as what you must do. And it's just, you know, and that's kind of that. If you have something that you feel that way about, then in a way you've kind of won the game of life. You know, I mean, there's a lot of cost to it, but it's good to have that kind of certitude, right? So okay, so let's get it's pretty one of the other lines I always love from the Freedom Rise was somebody described the leg through the Upper South as they heard we were coming and they baked us a cake. I can't remember who said that, but it was like because Farmer wanted to provoke retaliation. That was the point, and that was one of the reasons that some people in the movement didn't like the Freedom Rise. They thought it was kind of a stunt, and that it was just kind of provocative for the sake of provocation. But anyway, you get to Atlanta, and doom. There's a sense of doom. You meet with to talk about that Last Supper. And here you are in your own hometown, like a stranger in your own town, because you've got this role that your parents don't quite really know about, even though they gave you permission, kind of.
Well, when we got to Atlanta, we had hoped, we were going to meet with Dr. King, and we had hoped, you know, kind of silently that he might join us. And, he sat and we talked, and he talked to each one of us. And that was a good thing because, I knew him from working in the student movement, Atlanta student movement. So Dr. King says that I understand that danger awaits you in Alabama. He says, in fact, the word is you guys won't even make it out of Alabama. Now, we had a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. King, but, you know, we had a job to do. But we met with his staff, and we went on to the university. We met the members of this Atlanta student movement, Lonnie and Herschel. And it was nice. And also, I got an opportunity to go home and talk with my siblings and my parents. And I said I was going to level with them, let them know what we were really doing. And I did. And I got their mother's approval. And I'm glad that I did, because not knowing what was going to happen the next day, I think I would have really been hurt, and she would have been devastated even more so if I had not told her what it, we didn't have, cell phones and things like that. So you didn't get any news to the normal cycle of news. And all they knew was a bustle had been set afire and the other people were beat up. And she knew that somewhere in that mess was me. And but fortunately, the person who was my next of kin had gotten word to her that what had happened and that I was okay. Well, I was okay. But I wasn't seriously injured.
Well, let's show the pictures of what happens to the first. So true enough, there was hell to pay in Alabama. So this was the Freedom bus that Mr. Person was not on. This was the Greyhound bus that was ambushed outside of Anniston and firebombed. And that was the one that Hank Thomas, who Mr. Woods referred to earlier, was on. I've never seen that picture. I've never seen the carcass like that. That's pretty interesting. I always love the S&H green stamps in the photographs because it reminds you of normal life in the South at that time. Probably anybody under the age of 60 doesn't even know what they are. But and here they are, being taken to the hospital. I think that the white people were provided ambulances, right? But the African Americans were not.
Well, they worked out at first when the white ambulance drivers refused to take the Freedom Riders, all of the Freedom Riders, the white Freedom Riders. If you don't take them, then we're not going either. Mm-hmm. So they kind of caucused, and they finally realized they needed to do something. And eventually, all of them got to the hospital. But here's one thing I found real recently is that once they got to the hospital, they gave the white Freedom Riders oxygen but not the black freedom riders. But Hank Thomas tells the story of that Ed Blankenheim shared his oxygen with him, so they just couldn't keep us apart. I don't care what they did.
They couldn't segregate the air, right?
No.
So talk a little bit about how much you were aware of. You write about this a little bit, but you guys weren't really getting the full story of what had happened to the Anniston bus, right? Or to the Greyhound. You were about an hour behind leaving Atlanta, I think.
Right. Well, what happened when we got to Anderson and the bus station was closed, and when the driver gets off the bus and there's a bunch of people milling out around, and there was also a police officer. He talks to them, then he gets back on the bus, and he says, "I understand the Greyhound bus has been set afire, and they're taking the people to the hospital by the carloads." Now, all we knew is that our friends were on that bus. Now, how bad they were, we had no way of knowing. So, being young and so for my mind with the thought of fire is just devastating. But it didn't make us we didn't depart from our plan. In other words, the bus driver wanted us, because that had happened, he didn't want it to happen to his bus, so he wanted the blacks to get to the back of the bus. And of course, we refused, and then they came on the bus and they began to beat us. And the students first.
Yeah, and so the regular white passengers, did a lot of them that were kind of hustled off? Is that right?
Right. Well, some in Atlanta were discouraged from taking that bus because some of the ones who rode with us from Atlanta had told them that, hey, whatever. I don't know what they said to them, but people who were in line to get on the bus, got out of the line.
Oh, that was Atlanta, yeah. And so then in Anniston, the white thugs get on the bus, and and they beat you up while you were parked in the bay in the station.
In the station, yes.
Mm-hmm. So talk about that a little bit. I never could quite. I know when they couldn't quite figure out how they. Yeah. So describe that happened. It was just a gruesome scene. So Mr. Bergman and Mr. Peck were on that bus, and Mrs. Bergman, and the white people were sitting in the back. And you and another African American were sitting toward the middle or front. Is that right?
No, we were in the front. We were the very first seat on the bus as you get on the bus. Midway were two other students, and then you had the Bergmans and Frances was an observer, so she was off to herself. She was not basically like a normal passenger, not associated with anyone. And we always had someone in that role. And also in the very, very back of the bus, we had a reporter and a photographer. When we refused to go to the back of the bus, 8 men get on the bus and they start punching us, but they were not. They were punching us, but they're also trying to force us to the rear of the bus. They got us in the aisle and they forced us towards the back. And when we were at midway of the bus, Dr. Bergman came forward and James Peck. And that really made them angry to think that white men would come to the rescue of these students. Dr. Bergman, they knocked him to the floor of the bus and they began to stomp him in his chest. And had his wife not begged them, they probably could have killed him there. James Peck was a bleeder. So when he hit the floor of the bus, his blood covered the floor of the bus and it made it slippery. So you have this scene where you got them pushing and punching the students toward the back. We're stumbling over Dr. Bergman and we're slipping on James's blood. And it was terrible. Eventually, they got to the point where they could physically throw us to the back of the bus. And one eyewitness says they stacked us like pancakes in the back of the bus. And once they were satisfied that all the blacks were in the back of the bus, they said midway of the bus, and they taunted us all the way into Birmingham. And it took us 2 hours to get to Birmingham because the bus driver had been warned that a mob awaited our bus. And had our bus been firebombed, I don't think we'd have had the strength at that particular time to get off a burning bus. We took a back route to Birmingham, and it took us 2 hours. And those of us who've taken that route know it's not a 2-hour drive.
Yeah. And so then the moment you pull into the trailway station, you don't know that you're walking into an ambush by the Klan that has been approved by Bull Connor, the public safety commissioner of the city of Birmingham, And the FBI has also been made aware of it by their informant inside the Klan. They also do nothing to protect you, even though they know that the police are not going to be there, and that Bull Connor has given the Klan 15 minutes to do the work of the city, basically, the work of the white city. So that's the moment where you turn to James Peck and talk about what you saw in his eyes.
Well, James was, he was already battered. He's bloody, but he was a champion. So let's go. We're gonna do it anyway. And little did we know what awaited us. I mean, because when we got into the waiting room, the entire wall of men came towards us. They had all kinds of weapons. One eyewitness says that some of the men had guns. So I mean, they could have put us away there. And James went down almost immediately. And I guess my being younger, I was able to maintain my balance and until they snapped the photograph. And when it happened, I think it startled them. And they simply allowed me to walk away. I didn't run. I didn't cover up. I just walked away. And I got out to the street. And a bus came by and I got on it. But the poor photographer, they beat him up. They destroyed his camera. And they thought they had destroyed all the film packs. But the one image exists, and that's the only one that survived Birmingham.
Yeah, that's not it. That's the one. Let's see. It's the one you showed, and in very visible in that photograph is the FBI's informant.
Right. Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, expletive. The old man better not find out about this." Meaning J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. And then this entire cover up ensues to protect him, and he goes on to commit other violence. So it was just the whole thing was just it created this kind of cascade of consequences, that began, once it passed into Birmingham, the buses crossed into Alabama. Yeah. So what? And so let me check the time. I want to leave time for Q&A. So you end up. Talk a little bit about the scene on the. So you just go and get on the first city bus that you see. You have no idea. You've never been in Birmingham, right? You don't know where it's going or where you are. Talk a little bit about that, because that was interesting. It was a white bus driver, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
and you're bleeding.
As fate would have it, when I got out to the road, not knowing where I am, a bus comes by and I get on it, and the driver sees me. He didn't charge me anything. I says, "Take me somewhere." So he drives about a couple of blocks, and he told me, he says, "If you go across the tracks, there'll be someone there to help you." Well, in the rural South, we all knew that black folks lived across the tracks because trains burn soot, and trains burn coal, and coal produces soot, which gets on everything. No matter how good a housekeeper you are, you have this thin layer of soot there. So once I got across the tracks, I was in friendly territory. I found a phone booth, and I called Reverend Shellsworth and told him that what had happened, and that I was alone, and I needed help. And I don't know how they were able to find me.
That's just remarkable. And,
yeah,
and he sends a couple of drivers, a couple of people show up and take you back to his. Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, to this day I wonder how it's not like you got a bunch of street signs or your very distinct landmarks, and but they got there, and I guess if anyone knew Birmingham, Reverend Shellsworth knew Birmingham.
Right, and you alluded earlier to losing your notes, and that's because they were in your jacket, and all the Freedom Riders had a very strict dress code because you needed to look like you were kind of dressed for church, right? Mm-hmm. So you lost your notebook because you had your jacket stripped off of you, and I love that. That's the thing that kind of what you were most frosted about.
Well, we had been treated royally from the start. I mean, every stop, we either had a mass meeting at a church or a university. And at the end of the night, we had to be boarded. And these people volunteered to provide lodging for us and feed us. And so they were, and a lot of them didn't have that much, but they gave us the best that they had. And it was something that I didn't want to forget. So I kept notes and phone numbers and all that, and hope to at least thank the people, when the ride was over. And because I lost my jacket, not only did I lose my notebook, but also lost my claim check for my baggage. So my other jacket and my other clothes, and you'll see in all the pictures after that, I don't have a jacket on, and that's because I lost both from the one I had on and the one in my luggage.
Now, are you in the picture that that just popped up?
Oh,
Let's
yes.
see that one again. Okay, let's find you. Well, is that
see
you
me?
without the jacket? Is that
Without a
you
jacket.
holding the
Yeah.
newspaper?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Wow. Okay. Well, your shirt looks pretty clean. I guess Shuttlesworth gave you one.
Yeah. Well, in
And
those days, you wash things at night and you press them. So that was, you didn't have to take them to the laundry. Most people had an iron.
and yeah, let's see that again because you can see James Peck. He was taken to the hospital and got, I don't know, 70 something stitches.
53 stitches.
Yeah, and there's Reverend Shuttlesworth kneeling.
Right.
And who's that?
Right.
Who's that next to you?
That's Theodore Gaffney. He was a photographer on our bus.
Right. And okay.
Elton. Then you got Elton Cox, the preacher.
Elton. Where's B. Elton Cox?
He's the one next to Jim Peck on the other side.
Oh, in the light suit.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And then, and the other person that's alive that was on the morning bus is right next to him, and that's Mrs. Moses Newsom. He's with the Baltimore American, and I talked to him the other day. He's 94 years of age, but he's still around.
Wow. So he was on the bus with you?
Oh, he was on the burning bus. The bus.
The burning bus. Okay. Wow. Okay. So he's the one, the second from the right.
Right.
Okay.
And the last one is Sim.
Oh yeah, he was Jet Magazine.
Yeah, Jet Magazine. Right.
He was a famous black journalist. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So I think we've got a few questions. I know that everybody wants to catch up to the present day, but after much debate, the original Freedom Riders decide to take the plane out of town instead of the bus, right? And after a couple of and Kennedy sends down John Siegenthaler, one of his aides, and then SNCC, the Southern Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee chapter in Nashville continues the rides. John Lewis had been on it originally, but he was not going into Birmingham. And one of my favorite anecdotes about James Farmer is that when he started getting into direct action, his father, who was a professor of religion at Howard, said, and Jim Farmer says, he goes, "I'm going to fight segregation by Gandhian means," and he said, "Gandhi was in India and they put him in jail. You're in Bama, they'll shoot you." So anyway, so his father died when you guys were in Atlanta, I think. And so he leaves, and then his mother looked at when his father died. His mother looked at the map to see where the Freedom Riders was, and he said, "Dad died to spare Junior from Alabama." And instead, Mr. Person got chosen. So it was kind of a skeleton crew who went in, into Alabama after all. So why don't we? Should we open it up? I've got a question, and then I want to also talk a little bit about the effects of this on you, because you ended up joining the Marines. Is that correct?
Yes.
Instead of going back to Morehouse. Somebody wants to know where you found the courage to do this. And you can read the book. There's some hints in there, but how would you summarize it or characterize it?
Simply, I looked at my family. My dad worked 2 jobs, and my mother had to go back to work. And I knew that life had to be better than that. And they were not dumb people. My mother, in fact, graduated. Well, she was in those days. It would skip you, if you were a good student. So she was skipped 2 times. So she finished 2 years earlier than normal. And that was smart as well. So it wasn't because of academics or their smartness, but it was a system of segregation. Is they determined the market and they paid you what they wanted to. And there were a lot of black men and women who were qualified, but they weren't making very much money. And as a domestic, they only paid $5 a day plus bus fare. And typically, black male worked anywhere from 40 to 45 to $50 a week. That was like standard wage, no matter what the job was. And that just shows you how the system worked. And the people, companies were making a lot of money on people because they had cheap labor. And I saw that, and I said there has to be a better way. There's got to be something better. We even had college graduates in Atlanta. They went to the post office because that's the best job they could get, and that they would not be laid off or fired. And we had a ton of people that's the path they chose because they knew if they went to Lockheed or General Motors or Ford Motor Company, they could be laid off because they were the last to be hired and the first to be laid off. So we were looking for just a better life all around.
It's okay. Let's see, CW. What, if any, advice or special words were given to you from Fred Shuttlesworth or other leaders of the movement?
Well, the main thing is to maintain your nonviolence posture. They knew that, first of all, if you fought back, it would escalate the violence and also justify in their minds for doing what they were doing to you. So the main thing is they stressed more than anything to maintain our composure. Also, we were disciplined, and we followed the dress code. And you have to realize we were fortunate because we had a lot of good leaders. And you had Dr. King, Abernathy, Shuttlesworth, James Farmer, Dr. Lawson. I mean, just a tremendous amount of people to provide you leadership and provide guidance.
What do you? So this is the book really doesn't go much into the aftermath or your life afterwards, and just what I heard that you didn't really talk about being a freedom writer, that even your wife didn't know about it.
No,
Tell me that. Was it sort of? I mean, do you think it was traumatizing in a certain way, and you just didn't want to?
Well, there are several things. First of all, we never got any treatment or conditioning after the rides, and it was very traumatic. And I couldn't talk about it. In fact, I've been married for 10 years, and my wife, all she knew is I was involved in this student movement. But when we came to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, I logged in there, and a porter saw my name, and he called me, and we talked about it. And after that, I began to get requests to speak and things like that. But even then, it was very difficult because I would break down and I would cry or I would become speechless. I mean, I was, because sometimes the memory is very, very difficult to deal with. And generally, I try to prepare if I got a lecture or something for just about any eventuality, because when I'm confronted with a question that I'm not prepared for or something comes up, then it can bring me to tears even now. So it's not easy. Even they wanted me to possibly read the audio book, and I told them I know I couldn't do it. And even when I reread the book after it was right before it was released, there were several times when I would just break down because the remembrance of people that I'd worked with and been with, and then of course, my interaction with the Bergmans and James Peck, which are very intimate and very, very, very personal, because people cannot understand the things that they did under the circumstances they did. And if they did, I mean, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, we should give a shout out to your co-writer, Richard Rooker. Yeah, it's just a wonderful. I wanted to let everybody know it's just a wonderful reading experience. It's just so good. It's so vivid. It's so alive on the page, and I just, as a writer, I just really admire the craft of it a lot. as well as obviously the content. This is Richard Rooker. So, I mean, was it the psychic? So was it the psychic trauma or the physical that got to you most when you would relive it?
Physically, this is something I don't understand. That
Mhm.
day, I felt no pain, and I was
Mhm.
not afraid. And I don't understand it. I to this day I have no idea because I played sports, had boxed, I wrestled, played football, so I knew what pain was. But for some reason, I took all the punches. They couldn't knock me down. I never lost my balance, and I never cried out, and I never covered. I didn't try to block them or anything. And but I didn't feel any pain. But it's most of the trauma is psychic because when they were calling you the N word, it's not so much the words themselves; it's the contortion of their faces with the anger and the hatred that existed. And that's what, in my young age, I couldn't understand that these people had never seen me before. They didn't know me, and yet, I, evoked that kind of passion and hatred from them. Uh, I don't even understand it today. Uh,
Well, I was going to say, how did you feel on January 6th? I mean, that was the same
oh,
kind of,
oh
right?
yeah, that was frightening. And people, I don't understand how some of the people can deny they knew they were afraid. I mean, there are times I know I should have been afraid, and even though I may not have been, but let's face it, I mean, that is not something you want to confront or deal with every day.
Yeah. And you were 18 and you had teenage hormones that rendered you invincible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do
you
you,
don't think about your mortality as an 18-year-old. You're not looking at your mortality. It's
uh,
that's the last thing you think about.
now, did you, do we have any, let's see, I missed a question there. Let's see the other one. Let's see that one again that uh, uh, were you, Mr. Person, able to continue into Mississippi and were you one of the ones sentenced to hard labor at Parchman Penitentiary? This is when the riots continued.
Uh, what happened to me after we finally got to New Orleans and after we were done, I came back to Atlanta and I was subpoenaed. Uh, that picture that was taken in Birmingham, the FBI had identified all the men in it, and I was summoned to their trial in Montgomery. And while the young people were at the First Baptist Church, with the replacement Freedom Riders were at the First Baptist Church in Montgomery, I was across town in preparation for the trial. In fact, I stayed at the Abernathy's house while I was awaiting trial. But that's why I didn't continue to ride. Well, I didn't continue to ride at that particular point. I went home to get my affairs together, and my mother was afraid that I was going to be killed if I stayed in the movement. So she suggested that I join the Army. It would be safer to be in the Army than to continue the civil rights movement. So rather than join the Army, I opted to join the Marine Corps. But I did this because I had not been truthful to my family, and my mom, she's a lovely person, and I said that I would honor her wishes, that I would not continue there, but I would fight my battles in the Marine Corps because the Marine Corps has some racial issues too. And I figured, well, hey, I'll go in, I'll get commissioned, and I'll be able to do some things. But it took me 10 years before I got my commission, even in the Marine Corps. So.
Oh, really? And then how long were you in the Marines?
I was there for 20 years.
20 years.
Yes.
Now I know that you alluded to, we can take this up privately, but you alluded to the Cuban Missile Crisis a couple of times, which is a big part of the current book I'm working on. So I'll get to you privately about that.
Okay.
Find out what you're doing there. Do we have any other? This is a good question. Have any of the attackers ever apologized to you for their brutality?
No, I have a standing invitation that if anyone's still alive, I would really like to sit down and have a cup of coffee with them. I might even have an adult beverage with them, and I would just really just have a conversation. John Lewis is the only freedom rider that has ever been apologized to my knowledge. And that happened in from the beating he received in Rock Hill, South Carolina, And the gentleman, we reenacted on the Oprah Winfrey 50th anniversary. But he was, I think, because he was confused because when they asked John if they wanted to um, prosecute these guys, John said, "No, we're not about punishing people. We're about the system of segregation." And I think that had a very strong impact on that man because, he was very remorseful. And
Oh, really? Oh, you think it did at the time
yeah,
as well? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and also the FBI, the attackers, the ones they zeroed in on were the kind of lone wolves. Who, they didn't zero in on the ones that they had pictures of who were in the main cavern that their informant had infiltrated, because they wanted to protect him. So I read the file from the FBI on the investigation, and it was like, Herschel Ash, somebody from Rome, Georgia. I think it was the guy. There's a guy holding up a lead pipe that's
yeah,
concealed in a paper bag.
yeah.
And
He did the most damage to me. Is that the other punches and stuff weren't, but the pipe did pop the top of my head, which caused me a lot of problems. And since I didn't get any treatment in Birmingham, or medical treatment,
Mhm.
the wound drained to the base of my skull, and I developed the nut. It got to be about the size of my fist. And basically, I was afraid to have it removed because I thought I had a knife blade or ice pick broken off in my skull.
Oh
And
dear.
but with the advent of the MRI, you was able to have it scanned, and we realized that there was nothing there. And
Yeah.
I had a great plastic surgeon, and he removed it. And I haven't had any problems, even though recent scan says that there is some residual damage, but it's not bothering me physically or cognitively. And I
Mhm.
guess I'll deal with it if I have to in the future. But right now, I don't care.
Well, and then Walter Bergman, who was beat up, the white man, pretty old, he was in his 60s. He had lifelong consequences of that, and sued the Justice Department once it came out that the informant had let them know, that they were going to get beat up, and they did nothing, and they did, I don't think that they didn't win the case, though. I think they may have gotten a small settlement, but so I wonder, what you think. When I was reading your book, and what I've been thinking a lot during the current kind of outpouring of racism in the country, is that one of the things, and this comes out in your book a lot, is the kind of degree to which white people go crazy when Black people don't mind them, And I'm just wondering whether I don't know if anybody has watched the very painful videotape of Sandra Bland, the African American woman in Texas who was stopped for, some minor traffic thing, and you can just see the cop, just the fury rising in him, and she ends up dead in the jail cell, And I just wonder, like, what, how what your deep thoughts are about what's going on now, and how you look back on what you went through. It was a huge turning point in history. You passed through it, It sounds like, did you talk about it in the Marines very much, or did anybody know that you had participated, or would that have hurt you?
No, well, let me explain this. You bring this up, and I'm going to tell the truth. Okay, here's what happened.
Yeah.
In Vietnam, many of the young kids from the South had their Confederate flag and stuff like that. And I don't know what they knew about me, but I know that I never had trouble getting up, a fire team for a patrol or to man the foxholes. And I think the word out was that nigga's crazy, but he'll keep you alive. So I always had plenty of volunteers when I went out on to do things. And but like I say, in Vietnam, I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. And I tell people, at least in Vietnam, I had a gun. As a freedom rider, I didn't have anything. So
Wow. So they picked up on your movement cred one way or the other.
yeah.
You didn't have to tell them about it.
But the guy's weird, and I don't know. I had a lot of fun, but you know, I knew being from the South. You know, I understand. You know, the thing with the Confederate flag, and I knew it didn't intimidate me. You know, it didn't bother me like it did a lot of brothers. A lot of brothers it really was especially the ones from the North. But you know, I just worked around it because I figured in the end we were going to win. I figured I was on the right side of history. So
Yeah. And you've got a, I guess, why don't we, you have an institute now, a civil rights, a Freedom Riders Training Institute or something now? You want to talk
you know,
about that a little bit?
what happened when they murdered Mr. Floyd? I was so upset that I called Pete Conroy, who is involved in the Freedom Rider National Monument, and told him, I said, you know, we know how to conduct nonviolent demonstrations. We can keep our movements from being hijacked so that communities won't be destroyed. So out of that conversation, we come up with a desire to provide a training syllabus for not only for police officers and first responders, but also for people who want to lead demonstrations and also for educators. And we figure if we work collaboratively together in confronting First Amendment rights and also all other kinds of demonstrations, that we can do so in a nonviolent and peaceful manner. And hopefully we can have solved some of the problems that we have in this country without the flare-ups that exist, and then also the um, inability uh, to define what's going on. In other words, you know, the groups today, many of them have not defined who they are, and they have not defined what their mission is. So the community has no idea, well, why are they marching? And I think that needs to do that is to let people know, because we all work together. We working together, we can solve these problems. But the thing is, when people feel left out, they're either going to pass judgment or they will not support you. But the young people out there, I admire them because they're doing a lot of good work. There's some things I would do differently, and but I think, you know, it's not for me to tell them how to demonstrate, but I would like to assist them in being peaceful and not let people who are not have has a different agenda get involved, because their intent is to be nonviolent, and I know that they are, but I know that also because they don't have the mechanism to control, people join who have evil intent on their minds, who really do give a bad light to for the Black Lives Matter and the other groups that are out protesting.
Right, right. Especially during election season,
Yeah.
you know, where it can do some real damage. Yeah. So do we have any, I think I was going to mention that I think Teresa Shadrich was on, and from Anniston, and who's doing a great special issue on the Freedom Rides coming up, I think a week from Sunday. So anyway, if we don't have any other questions, maybe we should wrap up. What do you think?
Yeah,
One
yeah,
more questions? Okay.
yeah. We want to go ahead and wrap up. You know, we could have this conversation go on for the rest of the day, especially all of the great information that I've learned from this presentation and just from scanning the book. I went to Xavier University. I never knew that my university was involved in the Freedom Rides until I just scanned
Yes,
your book. So
yes.
I just had to shout that out really quickly. But you all need to get this book. The buses are coming. Buses are coming. Memoir of a Freedom Rider, Charles Person. We are selling the book here at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute on our website. So please, if you all are interested, it's an excellent book. I haven't read it yet, but just from scanning it and reading and listening to some of these stories, it's a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, and you get a firsthand look into someone who put their life on the line for all of us to be better and for this nation to be better. And so we just want to thank you, Charles, for all of the things that you've done, not only as your being a person of the movement, but also with your service in the military and everything you've done since then. And Diane, we want to thank you as well. Carry Me Home, excellent book. Everybody should read it. But we just want to say thank you. You
Yep.
said it's on your shelf. Exactly.
Yes, that's
Exactly.
right.
Excellent civil rights book. And then Charles Pearson's book also excellent. So please, you can get both of those books from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Go to our website, bcri.org, and you can order those books. Please give us some time to fulfill those orders and get them shipped out. Any last thoughts, Mr. Pearson?
Well, support the young people out there, encourage them, and let them know when they're doing things right, and help them because they're in a learning mode. We were in the same situation years and years ago, and one thing we did have supportive community, but we communicated with the community because we all want to make our communities better, and if we work together, police, first responders, students, and teachers, we can do it.
Thank you again. Thank y'all very much. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Stay in tune to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, bcri.org for future virtual programming. And we thank y'all for another great installation of our virtual programming. And thank you all for being with us today.